Why was everyone staring at her like she'd already done something wrong? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the Naval Joint Operations Hall, casting pale reflections across polished floor panels. Boots settled into formation with the practiced precision of people who knew exactly where they belonged. Fleet Admiral Donovan Hale walked the center aisle with a glare sharp enough to scrape the room clean. His voice cut through the air, reprimanding officers for sloppy readiness reports. Everyone stiffened. Everyone except the one he suddenly paused in front of. Lieutenant Commander Ava Ryland stood among junior personnel, clipboard against her side, quiet posture, chin neutral, eyes steady. She didn't move, didn't react, just stood there like the stillness itself was her answer. Hale stared at her like her presence alone offended protocol. "You got lost on your way to administrative storage," he said, words carrying more judgment than humor. A few quiet snickers followed. He stepped closer, not inches but breaths, waiting for her reaction. She gave none. The silence stretched. Then his open palm cracked across her jaw. The sound snapped through the room like a bone breaking. Ava didn't stumble, didn't flinch. She simply repositioned her footing like adjusting to a change in wind. Whispers died instantly. The hall turned into one unmoving witness. And in that moment something shifted, not in her but in the space around her. Because the woman standing there, absorbing impact without so much as a tremor, wasn't just another officer filling space in a crowded hallway. She was something they didn't understand yet. Something they dismissed too quickly. Ava Ryland was in her late 20s, but on most days the uniform made age irrelevant. Rank stitched on cloth mattered more than numbers on a birth certificate. To the people at Joint Command, she was just another officer behind a desk, filling out forms, checking signatures, making sure training events matched the regulations stacked on her workspace. Her office smelled like paper and recycled air. There were no mats, no heavy bags thudding in the background, no shouted cadence from a row of exhausted students, just fluorescent lights and the soft clack of keyboards. People noticed her, but only in the way they noticed furniture, permanent, unremarkable, there. But there had been a time, not long before this assignment, when Ava did not spend her hours behind a desk. Before the transfer, she had been an instructor at a close-quarter military combative school, the kind of place where bone met mat and mistakes were felt in fractures, not in red ink. She had worn the same uniform, but people had looked at her differently then, with a mix of respect and apprehension reserved for those who had proven they could end a fight before it fully began. The deployment that changed everything had been sealed in her records with a sanitized summary and a vague phrase about sustained internal injury. The words did not carry the same weight as the memory. Choking dust, the taste of blood in the back of her throat, the echo of rounds slamming into walls that were never meant to provide cover. She had walked off that battlefield under her own power, but the doctors decided her body had paid too many unseen costs. After that, the Navy moved her to compliance. Her days became a rotation of verifying forms, checking signatures, ensuring everything matched the regulations. She didn't complain, didn't fight the reassignment. She just showed up, did the work, and stayed quiet. Around the office, the rumors were simple and tidy because people preferred tidy narratives. Someone muttered that she had messed up a mission. Someone else said she had failed a team, that command quietly reassigned her to keep her where she couldn't do more damage. The truth was buried in after-action reports and classified annexes that none of them would ever see. She didn't chase the rumors, didn't correct them. Instead, she fixed the little things no one else noticed. On the steps outside the operations building, she would pause beside a junior sailor whose collar sat twisted under the edge of his jacket. With a quiet apology for the intrusion, she straightened the fabric with practiced fingers. In a crowded elevator, she would reach over and square a crooked name tape before the doors opened, then step back without explaining why it mattered. Most mornings, she took her coffee standing near the back wall of the canteen, away from the cluster of tables where people traded gossip about assignments and promotion boards. She didn't slide into conversations or laugh to prove she fit in. She rested one shoulder against the cool painted surface, sipping in measured swallows while scanning the room, not as a security sweep, but out of habit. Her gaze never stayed on any one person long enough to feel like judgment. The silence around her was not emptiness. It was discipline. She had learned a long time ago that not every comment deserved an answer, and not every insult needed to be corrected in real time. There was strength in choosing when to speak, greater strength in recognizing when speaking changed nothing at all. On rare days when the air conditioning cut low and the summer heat pressed through the old walls of the building, she would unfasten the top button of her undershirt beneath the uniform. If someone happened to catch a glimpse, they might notice a thin, pale scar curling just below her collarbone. No one ever asked about it. They assumed it was from some minor accident, some training mishap. They didn't know that it traced the path of a surgeon's decision made in a foreign hospital where the power flickered during the night. When Ava read through reports at her desk, she often rested her left hand on her right wrist, fingers closing around the bones like a quiet band. It looked like nothing more than a thoughtful posture. In truth, it was leftover muscle memory, a subconscious check on joint alignment from years of demonstrating holds and counters. Her body remembered drills long after her students rotated to new stations and new wars. To Admiral Donovan Hale, none of this nuance existed. He saw her file, not her life. He saw her assignment line, compliance and logistics, and he read it as a story of failure and reassignment, not sacrifice. In his mind, ranks were not something quietly worn. They were weapons, and punishment was a training tool as old as the sea itself. He believed shame sharpened officers. He believed fear kept them aligned. From the first time he noticed Ava standing at the edge of a briefing, still as a fixed pillar while others shifted their weight, he disliked what he saw. Her calm was not the crisp, aggressive energy he respected. It did not bend toward him in the way he was used to. Her eyes stayed level, respectful but never shrinking. He read that as defiance. In closed meetings, when her name came up attached to a compliance review or a recommendation, his comments were clipped. "She is comfortable in the shadows," he would say. "Comfort breeds softness." He never asked about the scar, never asked what it took to leave an instructor's mat for a stack of binders. He didn't care how many hours she had spent teaching others how to survive inside rooms too small for second chances. All he saw was an officer who did not flinch under his stare. And a person who did not flinch under his stare, he decided, needed to be reminded who held power. What happens when you stand perfectly still while the world demands you break? The inspection briefing resumed the following day, and the tension from before hadn't disappeared. It had settled into the floor, into the way chairs scraped quietly, into how people positioned themselves farther away from where Lieutenant Commander Ava Ryland stood. She was still at the back, clipboard ready, posture composed. Most officers didn't look at her directly. Some did in quick, curious glances, as if waiting for another moment of disruption. Fleet Admiral Donovan Hale entered the hall with far less patience than usual. His footsteps carried purpose, his voice already sharp before he reached the podium. "Readiness is not paperwork," he said, packing slowly. "Readiness is performance, and weak performance is contamination." His words landed heavily. Then, without warning, he stopped moving, turned, locked eyes on Ava again. The room held its breath. He walked toward her, slower this time, deliberate. When he reached her, he didn't raise his voice. He lowered it, made it personal. "Do you think you belong here?" he asked. The question wasn't professional. It was designed to humiliate. She met his eyes, didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched long enough that people started shifting uncomfortably. Then she spoke. "I serve where I'm assigned, sir." Her voice was calm, measured, not defiant, not submissive, just factual, and somehow that made it worse for him. His jaw tightened. He leaned in closer, close enough that his breath moved the air between them. "You don't serve," he said quietly. "You occupy space." The insult hung there, waiting. She didn't take the bait, didn't react, just stood there, absorbing it like she'd absorbed the slap the day before. And in that moment, something dangerous flickered across his face. Because her stillness, her refusal to give him the reaction he wanted, felt like resistance, felt like challenge. He stepped back. "Address the room again. Discipline is not optional," he said. "Respect is not negotiable. And when either is absent, correction is immediate." turned back to Ava, raised his hand again. This time people saw it coming. This time there was no element of surprise, just cold, calculated intent. His palm swung toward her face a second time, but this time something different happened. Her left hand moved, not fast, not dramatic, just precise. She caught his wrist mid-swing, redirected it gently, almost politely. Then she released it and stepped back, hands returning to her sides. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. Hale froze, the room froze, because what just happened wasn't aggression. It was control. She hadn't struck back, hadn't escalated, she had simply stopped him. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't shock, it was realization. Slow, creeping realization that maybe, just maybe, they had all gotten something very wrong about Lieutenant Commander Ava Ryland. Hale's face flushed red. His voice came out tight, controlled, dangerous. You just assaulted a superior officer. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself, just stood there waiting. I defended myself, sir, she said quietly. Nothing more. His eyes narrowed. You're confined to quarters pending formal charges. Dismissed. She saluted, turned, walked out of the hall with the same measured steps she'd walked in with. And as the door closed behind her, the whispers started. Not loud, not disrespectful, just confused, because the woman they'd written off as administrative furniture had just done something none of them could quite process. She had absorbed 2 attempts at humiliation without breaking, without raising her voice, without losing composure. And somehow, in doing nothing more than protecting herself, she had made the most powerful man in the room look small. But there was something none of them knew yet, something buried in her file, something that would change everything once it came to light, because Ava Ryland wasn't just a compliance officer with a quiet demeanor. She was a ghost carrying secrets in sealed folders, and those secrets were about to surface in ways no one expected. How do you prove your worth when no one's willing to look at your record? The formal investigation began within hours. Military procedure moves slowly until it doesn't. When an admiral files charges, the machinery turns fast. Ava was confined to her quarters, a small room with a narrow bed, a desk, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. She didn't pace, didn't call anyone, just sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded, staring at nothing in particular, waiting. Because waiting was what she did best. Outside, the base hummed with speculation. Stories spread like wildfire through enlisted barracks and officer mess halls. Some said she'd attacked Hale unprovoked. Others said she'd been provoked but overreacted. A few, very few, wondered if maybe there was more to the story. Ensign Tate Rowland sat in the canteen with a group of junior officers, coffee cooling in front of him. He'd been the one who joked about Ava being permanent fixture, administrative furniture. The memory felt heavier now. I don't get it, one of the lieutenants said. Why would she do that? She had to know it would end her career. Rowland stared into his cup. Maybe that wasn't what she was thinking about, he said quietly. What do you mean? I mean, maybe she wasn't thinking about her career at all. Maybe she was just tired of being hit. The table went quiet. Because when you put it that way, when you stripped away the ranks and the protocols and the power dynamics, it became something simpler, something uncomfortably human. Meanwhile, the investigative panel convened in a secure conference room. 3 senior officers, all with decades of service, all with reputations for fairness. Commander Patricia Burke led the panel. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, deliberate in speech. She'd come up through intelligence, which meant she trusted evidence over emotion. Let's start with the facts, she said, opening the case file. Admiral Hale claims Lieutenant Commander Ryland assaulted him during a routine briefing. He's requesting court-martial. The other panel members nodded. One of them, Captain Lawrence Hawthorne, leaned back in his chair. Have we pulled her full-service record? Burke shook her head. Only what's been provided. Standard compliance and logistics assignment, prior instructor designation, medical reassignment following deployment injury. Hawthorne frowned. That's it, no operational details. Sealed, Burke said. Above our clearance. The third panel member, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chen, tapped the table thoughtfully. If her operational record is sealed, that usually means something significant happened. Something classified. Burke made a note. We'll request access, but even without it, we have eyewitness testimony. Multiple officers present during both incidents. They began interviewing witnesses. Most gave predictable statements. They saw the Admiral approach Ryland, saw him strike her, saw her remain still. Then the next day saw her intercept his second attempt. The stories were consistent, clinical, detached, until Chief Petty Officer Derek Mercer stepped into the room. Mercer was a combat veteran, 23 years in, with the kind of weathered face that came from deployments to places that didn't make the news. He sat down, adjusted his cover on the table, and waited. "Chief," Burke began, "tell us what you saw." Mercer was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, voice low and steady. "I saw an admiral strike a junior officer without provocation. I saw that officer absorb the strike without retaliation. The next day, I saw the Admiral attempt to strike her again. I saw her defend herself with minimal force and immediate disengagement." Chen leaned forward. "Minimal force," Mercer nodded. "Ma'am, I've trained in hand-to-hand combat for 2 decades. What Lieutenant Commander Ryland did wasn't an attack, it was a redirect. She caught his wrist, adjusted the trajectory, and released. If she wanted to hurt him, he'd have been on the ground." The room went very still. Hawthorne studied Mercer carefully. "You sound like you know her training background." Mercer met his eyes. "I don't know it, sir, but I recognize it. That kind of control doesn't come from basic combatives. That comes from someone who's taught it, someone who's lived it." Burke made another note. "Anything else, Chief?" Mercer hesitated. Then he said something that would change the entire trajectory of the investigation. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" "Granted. I've served with a lot of officers. Some of them talk about honor. Some of them wear it on their uniforms like decoration. But I've only met a few who actually carry it in their bones. Lieutenant Commander Ryland is one of them. And if this panel is going to decide her fate, you need to see her full record, not just the parts that fit a convenient narrative." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes when truth lands in a room and nobody knows quite how to respond. Because Mercer hadn't defended Ava with emotion. He defended her with observation, with the weight of experience, and that carried a different kind of power. Burke closed the file. "Thank you, Chief," dismissed. As Mercer stood and left, Hawthorne looked at Burke. "We need that sealed record." She nodded slowly. "I'll make the request. But it might take time." "Then we wait," Hawthorne said. "Because if there's something in there that changes the context of this case, we owe it to everyone involved to find out what it is." What do you do when the truth is locked behind classifications you can't access? The request for Ava's full service record went up the chain. It took 3 days. 3 days of silence, speculation, and mounting tension on the base. Ava remained in her quarters, reading, occasionally looking out the window, waiting with the same patience she'd shown throughout her entire career. She didn't expect vindication, didn't expect rescue. She'd learned a long time ago that institutions protect themselves first, individuals second. If this ended with a dishonorable discharge, she'd accept it the same way she'd accepted everything else, with quiet dignity and no complaints. But something unexpected was happening in the background. Word of Mercer's testimony had spread, not officially, but through the informal networks that exist in every military base. The people who dismissed Ava as administrative furniture started remembering small moments. The straightened collar, the corrected name tape, the way she'd never spoken poorly of anyone, never joined in the gossip, never used her rank to make someone else feel small. One by one, they started questioning their assumptions. Rollins found himself standing outside Ava's quarters one evening, not sure why he'd walked there. He didn't knock, just stood there for a moment, then left. But the guilt stayed with him. The realization that he'd contributed to a climate where an officer could be struck twice, and people's first instinct was to question her, not her attacker. On the 4th day, the sealed records arrived. Burke, Hawthorne, and Chen gathered in the secure conference room. The folder was thicker than expected, marked with classifications that made even these senior officers pause. Burke opened it carefully. The first document was Ava's instructor certification, advanced close quarters combat, defensive tactics, high-stress scenario management, exceptional ratings across every category, commendations from former students, notes about her ability to de-escalate situations before they became violent. She wasn't just an instructor, Chen said quietly. She was one of the best. The next document detailed her deployment, redacted location, redacted mission parameters. But the outcome was clear. 4 wounded service members extracted under active fire. Solo extraction for the first 70 meters before backup arrived. Minimal tactical communication. Unscripted success. Hawthorne read the summary twice. She pulled 4 people out of a hot zone by herself. Burke kept reading. Found the medical report. Sustained internal injuries, fractured ribs, damaged tissue, but she completed the extraction before seeking treatment. The doctor's notes were clinical but telling. Patient demonstrates exceptional pain tolerance and mission focus. Recommended for medical reassignment due to long-term injury risk, not performance deficiency. The pieces started fitting together. The quiet demeanor, the precise movements, the way she'd absorbed 2 strikes without flinching. This wasn't someone who'd failed. This was someone who'd given everything, gotten broken for it, and then been shuffled into a desk job while people assumed she'd washed out. Chen looked up from the files. "We need to reconvene the hearing with this context," Burke agreed. "And we need to make sure Admiral Hale understands what actually happened in that hall, because this isn't about an officer assaulting a superior. This is about a combat veteran protecting herself from repeated physical assault." The hearing was scheduled for the following morning. Word spread quickly. The base auditorium filled long before the start time. Officers stood along the aisles. Enlisted personnel crowded the back wall. Silent speculation filled the space like humidity. Ava arrived without escort, carrying nothing. She entered quietly, sat at the far right side, and folded her hands on her lap. She didn't look around, didn't acknowledge the crowd, just waited. Hawthorne entered next, followed by Burke and Chen. They carried the investigative notes, signed, stamped, authenticated. Those who understood the weight of such papers leaned straighter. Admiral Hale walked in last. He looked smaller somehow, not physically but in presence. Pride didn't accompany him now. Only obligation. Burke stepped forward. Her voice carried through the auditorium speakers with clear authority. "The board acknowledges that Lieutenant Commander Ryland did not initiate aggression. Her response was defensive, controlled, and non-damaging. The charge of conduct breach is therefore withdrawn, effective immediately." A ripple traveled through the audience. Not shock, not noise, just quiet adjustment of assumption. Hawthorne stepped forward with the signed conclusion pages. He looked directly at Hale. "The panel also recommends formal acknowledgement that Lieutenant Commander Ryland acted in preservation of order, not disruption." Then the words that mattered most. "You must withdraw your claim of misconduct, publicly." Every head turned toward Hale. The hierarchy demanded he speak. The silence demanded he speak. His career, his reputation, everything he'd built over decades demanded he speak. He swallowed once. "Lieutenant Commander," he began, voice thinner than usual. "My previous accusation was incorrect. My assessment was premature. You acted within professional boundaries." No apology spoken, but no denial either. Ava didn't stand, didn't seek dignity. She already had it. Burke gestured. "Acknowledgement must be formal, Admiral." He forced the words out. "I withdraw all charges. Junior personnel should recognize Lieutenant Commander Ryland as cleared of any disciplinary infraction." A quiet murmur rose, not from disrespect but from recognition of reversal. And then came the moment no one expected. Not even Hale. Chief Petty Officer Mercer stepped forward. He walked past the podium, past the front bench, past the Admiral. He stopped directly in front of Ava, and he saluted, full, proper, unwavering. When does respect become louder than any words ever spoken? Ava rose slowly. Not because ceremony demanded it, but because a chief petty officer standing in front of her with a salute that sharp deserved acknowledgement. She returned the salute, her movements precise, her eyes holding no pride, no triumph, just composure. The kind of composure that comes from years of carrying weight no one else can see. Mercer stepped back, held her gaze for one more second, then returned to his position. The auditorium stayed quiet, but something was building, something that couldn't be contained by protocol or rank structure. One officer in the third row stood, then another, then two more from the left side. Then the entire right side row rose together, followed by the center aisle. Within moments, every officer in that auditorium was standing, not clapping, not speaking, just at attention, unanimous, without command. The sight of it was something that couldn't be faked, couldn't be ordered. It was voluntary, instinctive, the kind of respect that moves through people when they realize they've witnessed something rare. Admiral Hale was the last one not standing. He hesitated, not because of resistance, but because he knew the meaning of this moment. Respect given publicly has consequences. Disrespect reversed publicly has greater ones. Then he stood, not out of admiration, not out of honor, just recognition of truth. His salute lacked strength, but protocol remained intact. Ava held his eyes only long enough to acknowledge rank, not ego. Then she lowered her hand and spoke. A single sentence. Not forceful, not loud, but carried perfectly across the microphone. "No, sir, respect is not owed, it is practiced." And she sat. Her voice didn't cut the room, it steadied it, gave people permission to exhale, gave them a framework to understand what had just happened. Because respect isn't a transaction. It's not something you demand or distribute based on rank. It's something you demonstrate, day after day, in how you carry yourself, in how you treat others, in how you respond when the world tries to break you. Hawthorne looked down, almost as if remembering someone from years earlier who taught the same philosophy on a training mat. Mercer exhaled, a sound almost like relief, though he wasn't the one who needed it. The audience remained at attention for 5 more seconds, silent, motionless, as though time itself required confirmation. When they sat, no one leaned back carelessly, chairs lowered with discipline, shoulders reset with posture. The room was different now, not in structure, not in uniform, but in moral gravity, because they remembered how easily judgment had come and how slowly truth revealed itself. The hearing adjourned. People filed out quietly, conversations muted, steps measured. But in the hallways, something had shifted. Officers who'd avoided Ava for weeks now nodded when they passed her. Junior enlisted personnel stood a little straighter when she walked by. Rollins found himself in the corridor when she emerged from the auditorium. He stepped forward, not blocking her path, just present. "Ma'am," he started, then stopped, struggled to find words. "I owe you an apology for the furniture comment, for not seeing." Ava looked at him, really looked at him, not with anger, not with judgment. "Ensign," she said quietly, "people see what they're conditioned to see. You're seeing differently now, that's what matters." She didn't wait for his response. Just continued down the hall, same measured steps, same quiet presence. But Roland stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of grace he wasn't sure he deserved. Over the following days, something unexpected happened. Officers started approaching Ava with questions. Real questions about training, about maintaining composure under pressure, about leadership that didn't require volume. She answered them the same way she'd answered everything else, with patience, with precision, without fanfare. A young lieutenant asked her how she stayed calm when someone was trying to provoke her. Ava thought for a moment. "Because their anger is their problem," she said. "My response is mine. I control what I control." Simple, direct, but it landed differently coming from someone who'd proven it under fire. Chief Mercer found her in the canteen one afternoon, sat down across from her without asking. "Ma'am," he said, "I wanted you to know that wasn't just testimony, that was truth." She nodded slowly. "I know, Chief, and I'm grateful for it." "You shouldn't have to be grateful for truth," he said, "but I understand why you are." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two combat veterans who understood that some things didn't need explanation. Some experiences created a language that only certain people spoke. "Can I ask you something?" Mercer said. "Of course." "That redirect when you caught his wrist. You could have done more, a lot more. Why didn't you?" Ava took a sip of her coffee, looked out the window at the parking lot, at the ordinary machinery of base life continuing around them. "Because hurting him wouldn't have proven anything except that I could hurt him," she said. "And I already knew that. What I needed to prove was that I didn't have to." Mercer smiled. A small, knowing smile. "You remind me of my first instructor. She used to say the strongest fighters are the ones who know when not to fight." "Your instructor was right," Ava said. They finished their coffee in silence. When Mercer stood to leave, he paused. "For what it's worth, ma'am, you're one of the best officers I've served under, even if you've never technically been my commanding officer." "That means more than you know, Chief." After he left, Ava sat there a little longer, watching people move through the canteen, listening to the low hum of conversation, the clink of dishes, the ordinary sounds of life continuing. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something close to peace. Do moments of clarity ever arrive loudly, or do they always settle in like dust after a storm? Weeks passed. The bass returned to its rhythms, but the rhythms felt different. More honest, maybe. Less performative. Officers walked the halls with a little less swagger, a little more awareness. The incident hadn't created heroes or villains. It had just revealed truths that were already there, buried under assumptions and hierarchy. Admiral Hale remained in his position, but his interactions changed. He was quieter in briefings, more careful with his words, less prone to using humiliation as a teaching tool. Some saw it as weakness, others saw it as growth. Both were probably right. Ava returned to her work in compliance. Same desk, same forms, same regulations, but the work felt different now. Not because the work itself had changed, but because the way people engaged with her had changed. They asked her opinion, included her in discussions, treated her like someone whose judgment mattered. She didn't seek the attention, didn't leverage her moment of vindication into anything resembling power. She just continued doing what she'd always done, fixing the little things, maintaining standards, showing up. One afternoon she received orders, a transfer request, back to the combatives training school, not as an instructor this time, but as the director of curriculum development. The letter was formal, official, stamped with all the appropriate seals, but attached to it was a handwritten note from the school's commanding officer. "We never should have let you go. Come home." She read it 3 times, sat with it for a while. Then she walked to Commander Burke's office and knocked. "Come in," Burke said, looking up from her computer. "Lieutenant Commander, what can I do for you?" Ava held up the transfer orders. "I received these, ma'am. I wanted to discuss them before making a decision." Burke smiled. "You're actually considering turning down a return to what you love." Ava sat down. "I'm considering whether leaving here sends the wrong message. To the people who stood up, to the people who changed." Burke leaned back in her chair, studying Ava with open curiosity. "You know what I see when I look at you?" Ava shook her head. "I see someone who thinks they're responsible for other people's growth, but growth doesn't work that way. You can model it, you can inspire it, but you can't carry it for them." She gestured to the transfer orders. "Those people who stood up, they did that because they were ready to, because something in them recognized what they'd been missing. You were the catalyst, not the cause." Ava absorbed that, let it settle. "So you think I should go? I think you should do what serves you," Burke said. "You've spent your entire career serving others. Maybe it's time to serve yourself. And if serving yourself means going back to the work you were born to do, then go." The words sat in the room between them like an offering. Permission Ava hadn't realized she'd been waiting for. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me," Burke said. "Just promise me something." "What's that?" "Promise me you'll stop thinking your value is measured by how much you sacrifice, because it's not. Your value is inherent, and the Navy needs officers who understand that." Ava nodded slowly. "I'll try. That's all any of us can do." Ava accepted the transfer. Her departure was scheduled for 3 weeks out, giving her time to transition her responsibilities and close out ongoing projects. The announcement went out through official channels, but word spread faster through unofficial ones. On her last Friday, the compliance office threw her a small gathering. Nothing elaborate, coffee and cookies in the break room, but everyone showed up, even people from other departments, even people she'd barely spoken to. Rollins approached with a small gift poorly wrapped. "It's not much," he said. "Just wanted you to have something to remember us by." She opened it. Inside was a photo frame. The image was of the auditorium, taken from the back, showing the moment when every officer stood in unison. Someone had captured it on their phone and had it printed. "I thought you might want to remember," Roland said quietly. Ava looked at the image for a long moment, at the sea of uniforms standing at attention, at herself seated, hands folded, at the space between intention and action. "Thank you," she said. "This means more than you know." Chief Mercer was the last to say goodbye. He found her packing up her desk late in the afternoon, most people already gone for the weekend. "Got a minute, ma'am?" "Always, Chief." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, that same weathered look on his face. "I've been thinking about something you said, about proving you didn't have to hurt him. And I realize that's the whole point, isn't it? The whole point of everything we train for, not to prove we can, but to prove we don't have to unless absolutely necessary." Ava smiled. "You're smarter than most officers, Chief." "That's not saying much," he said, grinning. Then the grin faded. "Seriously, though, you changed things here, you know that, right? I was just trying to survive, Chief." "Maybe, but sometimes survival looks like courage to everyone watching." They shook hands, held the grip a moment longer than regulation required. "You take care of yourself," Mercer said. "You too, Chief, and thank you for speaking truth when it mattered." Someone had to. Her last day came quietly. No ceremony, no fanfare. She packed her remaining belongings into a single box, did a final walkthrough of her office, and left the keys on the desk. As she walked out of the building for the last time, she paused on the steps. The same steps where she'd straightened a sailor's collar months ago. The same view of the parking lot she'd stared at from her quarters during the investigation. She took a breath, let it out slowly, and for the first time in a long time she felt something uncomplicated. Not triumph, not vindication, just release. The weight of other people's perceptions, other people's judgments, other people's narrow understanding of who she was, lifting off her shoulders like fog burning away in sunlight. She walked to her car, loaded the box in the trunk, sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. And as she drove off the base, passing the guard station, passing the gates, passing into civilian streets where rank meant nothing and uniforms were just cloth, she realized something profound. She had never needed them to understand her. She had never needed their validation or their respect or their recognition. What she had needed was to understand herself, to know, bone deep, that her worth wasn't defined by assignment or perception or the opinions of people who'd never walked her path. And now she knew. The knowing felt like coming home. What do we leave behind when we finally walk away from the places that tried to define us? 3 months into her new assignment, Ava stood in front of a class of 28 students. Young faces, hungry faces, people who'd volunteered for the hardest training the Navy offered because they wanted to be capable of more than they currently were. She didn't start with technique, didn't start with demonstrations or lectures or intimidation tactics designed to weed out the weak. She started with a question. "Why are you here?" Silence. They looked at each other, uncertain if this was a rhetorical question or an actual one. "I'm serious," Ava said. "Why did you volunteer for this course? What are you hopping to learn?" A young petty officer in the front row raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, I want to be able to protect my team in close quarters." Ava nodded. "Good answer. Anyone else?" A female seaman near the back spoke up. "I want to prove I can handle myself." "To who?" Ava asked. The seaman hesitated. "To myself, ma'am." "It's the best answer I've heard," Ava said, "because the only person you need to prove anything to is yourself. This course isn't about impressing me or impressing your command or looking tough in front of your friends. It's about developing capability you can trust, capability that serves you when everything else fails." She walked along the front of the formation. "Over the next 12 weeks, I'm going to teach you how to end fights, but more importantly, I'm going to teach you how to avoid starting them. How to read situations, how to de-escalate, how to use minimal force for maximum effect. Because the strongest fighters aren't the ones who can hurt people. They're the ones who know when not to." The class absorbed that. Some nodded. Some looked skeptical. That was fine. They'd understand eventually. Over the following weeks, Ava built the curriculum the way she'd always believed it should be built. Not around dominance, but around control. Not around aggression, but around precision. She taught them holds and releases, strikes and blocks, but always with emphasis on restraint, on knowing where the line was and choosing not to cross it unless survival demanded it. One afternoon, during a particularly intense grappling session, a student got frustrated. He'd been trying to escape a hold for several minutes, couldn't manage it, and finally slapped the mat in anger. Ava called a break, pulled him aside. "What's going on?" she asked quietly. "I can't get out," he said, frustration bleeding into his voice. I've tried everything. Have you? He looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, have you tried everything, or have you tried every aggressive option? Because sometimes the way out isn't through force. Sometimes it's through relaxation, through finding the space in the hold and using it. She demonstrated, had him apply the hold again. Then she relaxed completely, found the angle where his grip was weakest and slipped out with minimal effort. His eyes widened. I didn't know you could do that. Most people don't, Ava said, because we're conditioned to fight pressure with pressure. But sometimes the smarter move is to move with it. The lesson stuck, not just with that student but with the whole class. They started approaching problems differently, looking for elegant solutions instead of brute force ones, learning that intelligence could be as valuable as strength. By the end of the 12 weeks, Ava's class had the highest marks in the school's history, not because they were the most aggressive or the most physically dominant, but because they were the most controlled, the most thoughtful, the most precise. At the graduation ceremony, the commanding officer approached her. I don't know what you're doing differently, he said, but keep doing it. These students are exceptional, Ava smiled. I'm just teaching them what someone once taught me. That strength isn't about how much damage you can do, it's about how much damage you can prevent. Where did you learn that? She thought about the deployment, the extraction, the choice to endure 2 strikes rather than escalate. The moment in the auditorium, when she'd spoken 6 words that changed everything. I learned it from experience, she said, the hard way. That evening, alone in her office, Ava sat at her desk and looked at the photo frame Rollins had given her. The image of the auditorium, the standing officers, the moment when everything shifted. She'd kept it on her desk not out of pride but as a reminder that truth has weight, that dignity doesn't require volume, that respect is practiced, not owed. Her phone buzzed, a text from Chief Mercer. Saw your class's graduation scores. Proud of you, ma'am. She smiled and typed back. Proud of them, they did the work. You showed them how, that's teaching. She set the phone down, looked out the window at the training yard where tomorrow's class would gather, at the mats where people would learn to fight and, more importantly, learn when not to. And she realized something she'd never quite articulated before. This was where she belonged, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. Because every experience, every hardship, every moment of being underestimated or dismissed or struck across the face had taught her something valuable about restraint, about dignity, about the quiet strength that comes from knowing yourself completely. Ava Ryland didn't walk away from that auditorium a hero. Heroes fight for recognition. She walked away unchanged. And precisely because nothing changed for her, everything changed for them. Some heroes never announce who they are. They just carry themselves through halls of judgment, through whispers, through quiet rooms where truth takes longer to arrive than lies. Some victories never reach ceremony stages or promotion boards. They live in simple corrections, in restraint. In the moment, someone absorbs impact and chooses not to make the world fracture in return. Sometimes discipline is silent and still unforgettable. These stories matter just as much as the ones filled with explosions, medals, and battlefield speeches, because courage is not only seen in combat. Sometimes it stands at attention in an auditorium, answers no insults, and remains still until the world learns to stand correctly around it. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in the acting, in the quiet demonstration of principle under pressure, it changes everything. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely and forever.